Hello and welcome back to CG Visuals. My name's Zach, and today we've got something really exciting. We're going to be having a look at this 3D portal effect which I created using Trapcode Particular. And the best thing about this project is that it's completely free. So if you'd like to follow along, you can just click on the link in the description and download the project file. So without further ado, let's get started. Right, so here we are in After Effects. So once you've downloaded the project file, you'll be met with an assets folder, and we've also got the project file itself. So just bear in mind you will need Trapcode Particular, preferably version 3, as this is a particle system. And let's have a quick look at the export comp. So we've got the asset which has been pre-composed. We've got a checkered background here, so of course it's got an alpha channel, so you can replace that with the footage. So we've got an additive glow here, and then we've also got an atmospheric glow, which will actually lift the black levels behind the asset and also create this kind of vignette effect. So, you know, these glows will really help sort of push the asset to the, photographic level once you've got it in your footage. Now, this is an effect that I've wanted to try and create for some time. About 2 years ago, I actually got the chance to work on Doctor Strange. So I was working as a paint and roto artist on the film, which, is interesting in of itself, but I was always far more interested with what the effects department was doing. And I saw quite a lot of YouTube videos depicting this effect, and I really wanted to, take Trapcode Particular and see just how close we could get this effect to the film, because I know they didn't use Trapcode Particular to create this effect. Trapcode Particular has a few limitations that a full-on visual effects pipeline wouldn't have. Now, when attempting to create this effect, I did what pretty much every other tutorial does, where you try and create one or maybe two emitters and spin them around in a circle really quickly, and I realized that just wasn't going to work. When I looked at reference footage from the film, I realized there was more of a ring, and all the particles were being emitted in a certain direction from that ring. And the method in which I went about doing that is a little bit humorous. I'll just show you now. So this is why I referred to the effect as a rig. So we've got dozens of directional emitters which are all connected to these lights, or the lights are the emitters, and then those lights are connected to a central null object which can now control the rotation of the effect. And of course every single one of these lights has some variation in the position and rotation, and it creates enough chaos that you can actually replicate the effect. Of course we have had to use so we've got one particle system that deals with the particles that bounce on the floor, and then we've got some duplicated particle systems just to with different seeds to add the randomization that's needed. When it came to attempting to do the reflections, however, that's when I ran into the second problem, because Trapcode really doesn't have any solution for creating dynamic reflections from the particles. Instead, what I had to do was pre-render this asset and then put it into the scene and have that linked to the rig position here. So it's sort of a pseudo dynamic reflection. It does have some limitations, but if we create a new camera and we just pull this back a bit, we can rotate the camera around this effect and the reflection will behave as it's supposed to. And then of course we go back to our export comp. That'll dynamically update, and we've got the reflections. So let's just delete that camera and go back to what we had. So we've got these adjustment layers here which turn our reflection to something that looks a little bit more realistic. So when we go back here to the export comp, go at full res, you can see it's not just the asset turned upside down. We've also got some sort of specular effects here that make it look like it's on a shiny surface. And we can actually control that effect. If we turn off all of this stuff, so we're not soloing any assets. And we'll go to the particle controls here. And we can actually control the roughness of the reflection. So we can turn the roughness off, or we can turn it all the way up to the point where you would assume that we're on a very diffused concrete surface, or maybe a surface that has virtually no reflection at all. So as I mentioned before, we've got this rig. Now we can do all the things that you see in the films where we change the position of the particle system. This is going to maybe look a bit crazy because I just moved that back through one frame. But what I've already done is animated this rig here, this null object in Z space, so that the ring portal actually sort of flies through the camera. And it's just quite a cool, more unique way to have the portal come into the scene here. We've also got another compound blur here. This just helps to soften the effect. I found if you turn this off, sometimes it looks a little bit too sharp when we go back to this one. Whereas I found putting this on just adds a nice sort of softness, just helps make it look more realistic. So we've got this particles controls here, so we can control the directional spread. I mean, this will make the effect look a little bit crazy. As this is After Effects, some of these frames cache in, so if you want to actually see the change applied, you sometimes have to go to a different frame. Let's try changing the directional. So it has some effect. Could just help make things a little bit more chaotic. We've also got the emission rate. So that's fairly self-explanatory. Now here's where we see the limitations. You will decrease the emission rate, but we won't see the reflection update, because as I said, there just really is no way to do that in this case. We could duplicate this entire rig with all these layers and try and offset it, but it would be so slow at that point. It would just be a lot more efficient just to simply go to our reflection roughness and just increase that until it reflects the lack of particles. We can obviously go way much higher than what we had before with the particles. And this is why it's a rig, because everyone will have different sort of ideas for how they want to, interpret this effect and change it. We've got the wind speed here, so this is an interesting one. We can actually start increasing this, and the particles, if we go in a plus value here, the particles will start drifting off to the side. And you can imagine if you summoned this portal and it was really windy, like at the top of a mountain, and you pulled the camera back, you'd see all those particles there, conforming to the wind. So that's quite an interesting effect. I've also got an opacity boost here, so maybe you're one of those people who doesn't want the particle system to be too additive. So we can reduce that, or we can go over the top. This is actually adjusting the opacity of the motion blur as well. So let's quickly go back here and just see how everything's looking. So that's because we increased the emission rate here. Let's put that back to normal. See, sometimes you'll go back to your export comp here and the glows here will exaggerate the effect a little bit more than intended. So you can just play around with those values until you get what you want. So one of the things I wanted to show you was how to, so we've had the particle system, it's animating in quite a cool way. What we want to do is the thing where as the portal fades away, the particles don't just turn off, the actual portal gets smaller. And then the particles start to fade away. So what I'll do, I'm going to turn off the reflection here. And we'll take our rig position. We should really be called a rig locator, but so we'll take that and we'll just take the size here, and maybe over the course of a few seconds, we'll just reduce the size to maybe like 5%. And then we'll also go and put a keyframe on the emission rate here, and we'll have that animate to 0. And what I also like to do is just take those keyframes. I'll just select them here with a drag in a box, just right click. We'll just put an ease on them. Okay, so that's cached in. Let's have a quick look at that. So yeah, that's the effect we can do when it's a dynamic particle system. Okay, so the reason I turn this reflection layer off here is because it's not really going to do what we want it to do as our particle system starts shrinking. So this, unfortunately, is the only part where if you do want to do this type of effect, we'll have to do a little bit of manual work. So if we go to the keyframes we made on the rig position here, instead of changing the size in this composition here, which, you know, just have some weird results, what we can actually do instead is double click on this reflection comp, and we should be at the same point in the timeline where our first keyframe was. So if we hop back here, go to this keyframe, then hop back into this composition, we'll be at the same point in the timeline that we need to be. And what we can try doing is just, you know, we'll try making this moderately smaller just to see what kind of an effect that has here. Come to think of it, we were using keyframe assistance before, so we'll just see if that helps at all. Yeah, okay, cool. So, and then, you know, obviously the only thing we need to do then is just go to our anchor point, and we'll just have to keyframe this as well. So we'll get maybe to about to here, and we'll just push that up to where it needs to be. Go forward a little bit more. Let's just see how that's behaving. So it's not too bad. Just pop back in here, make this a little bit smaller. Until it goes all the way. And then we'll just want to keyframe the reflection roughness here, just to try and hide that transition. So we'll just put that all the way up to 100. Obviously enable the layers. If we go back in here, as it's a pre-rendered asset, we've got this hard edge. So what I just thought to do was we'll just soften the edge of that with a mask layer here. just put a position on it. So that way, as the circle gets further away from the floor, this thing here will just help to blend that in. Go back to our comp here. So it's a little bit difficult to explain, but you know, this is just the manual work that we've had to do. The good thing is that, you know, this isn't going to affect what happens when the particles come in. You know, the ring will still fly past the camera, the reflection will be in the right place. We'd still rotate the camera around and everything, and then of course when we get back to our export comp here, we're going to have a reflection that, you know, is actually believable. But as there is no way to truly, you know, simulate a reflection from these particles, you know, this is just a little bit of manual compositing stuff that we have to do. I mean, it's not that bad. It's just, you know, just a few, you know, anchor point keyframes here, just to try and move it down a bit more. And of course, you know, keyframing the size here. So it's not actually as much work as it seems, and you wouldn't even need to do these steps unless you know, wanted to do the effect where the ring disappears. So now we'll pre-render this, and you'll be able to see what I mean when this is done. Okay, and there's our little ring portal disappearing effect. So yeah, it's a reasonably good result. Obviously quite a lot of work went into getting the particles to behave the way they do, so you know, it's quite a pleasing effect, I think. Now I do have some interesting news. If you've been following this channel, you'll be aware that we mostly cover, you know, different techniques that you can do with Trapcode Particular. Now Red Giants recently released Trapcode Particular 4, which has some pretty huge features that I, quite frankly, never even thought was going to be in. You know, actually for the last couple of months, I've been thinking like, oh, if only Trapcode had a fluid system in it. You know, that's why I always had to use Maya, you know, some of the fluid dynamics in Maya to create like the smoke and stuff in some of the short films that I've been doing. And, you know, Trapcode Particular is great, but it's always had some pretty fundamental limitations in what it can do. Traditionally, in Trapcode, it's a 3D based particle system, and there's normally ever been two physics models. You know, first we're familiar with is air, where we can have velocity, air resistance, wind direction, gravity, and some, you know, some random turbulent effects for the wind. But you know, that's very limited. The other is bounce here, where, you know, we don't have the wind resistance or any of the effects of wind, but in return we can have the particles fall down and interact with a surface layer, and so you can have particles like bouncing or sliding on that layer. But what we've actually got now is a fluid system for Trapcode. If I just go into the design here, and I'm just gonna choose a preset here just to really show you what I'm talking about. So something like, let's just full screen this and apply it. I'm just going to make a camera here. Now, I've been wanting to do explosions in Trapcode for a long time. I was starting to think that maybe, you know, Blender might be the only way to do it. Right, I'm just going to let this cache in at half res. I mean, you simply would never be able to do something like this without fluids. Essentially what you're doing is you've got this 3D body of fluids and you're injecting particles into them, and those fluids, depending on the values you set for them, will determine, you know, how the particles interact with those fluids. So you can create like ink jet effects. Let's see, I think that's particles will disappear at that point. You know, if you've ever wanted to do something with particles where you inject ink into water, or you have this kind of fume effects where you have rising heat and smoke and stuff like that, you know, that's all going to be possible now with Trapcode Particular 4, which I just got this Christmas. You know, because I've been working in the industry for a while, and you know, my interest has really been drawn to the effects side of things, because if you're an indie filmmaker, you know, what options do you have for doing like these big budget effects? You know, either you pay hundreds of pounds and for stock footage, really good high quality stock footage, like 4K stuff, and you're compositing that, and that's going to be as slow to render. Or maybe you go for like a different package, like maybe Houdini, Fume Effects, Maya Fluids, or Blender, which is pretty good these days. You can create some stuff in there. Only problem is the skill level, the technical entry for that kind of stuff in those programs. I've struggled with it myself, you know, when I've tried to do like Maya Fluids. And then once you've got the fluid, you have to do all sorts of stuff like cache it, and when it comes to rendering, maybe you've got some free options, but you know, in my case, I had to pay a lot of money for cloud rendering. And I've actually been working on a major upgrade to the Trapcode Fire project files that we have on VideoHive. It's probably going to be called like version 2 or something, where we've basically like redone them all from the ground up. I can show you a really quick sneak preview of just the quality of the stuff we're doing with Trapcode Particular. And you remember, this is the old version, so you know, I can't even imagine what I'm going to be able to bring you guys with the new version of Trapcode Particular. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Can't wait to see how that develops. But anyway, be sure to let us know what you want to see in the comments in future, and thanks for watching.